Hey, hello, and welcome to Broker Than You. I am your host, the best podcast host in the universe, Steve Cully. I would like to thank our sponsors at Procyon Partners. They specialize in employee benefits, wealth management, and retirement planning. President Sean Rabinowitz is a proud supporter of our podcast network, and we love him and everything he does for us. Green Street Trust International, owned and operated by Rennell Jump, West Palm Beach, Florida. They offer a variety of services, but they specialize in tax planning for businesses large and small. They will save you money or give you a big fat return. To schedule your free consultation, go to www.greenstreettrust.com. Pete Finch and the Finch Law Firm specializes in injury, any personal injuries that you've had. If you had a slip and fall, a car accident, your mother-in-law ran you over with her car, your wife stabbed you, the Finch firm is for you. Pete has won legal battles all over the state of Connecticut. He will go to war for you. He is not afraid of any insurance companies, and he will get every dollar you deserve in compensation. Just go to thefinchfirm.com. And remember, if you're in a pinch, call Finch. We have Dynamic Human Performance, owned and operated by UConn legendary running back Andre Dixon. He trains boys and girls of all ages, of all sports. He just started a new boot camp program. If you want to get into shape, go work with Andre. Every day at 6 a.m., you can go there for his boot camp. He has an athletic development program that has been very successful. He takes boys and girls, their sport of their choice, and he will train them, develop them from the ground up to help them reach their full potential. Andre has sent boys and girls of all sports to college on scholarship. So if you want to work with the best in Hartford, Connecticut, go to www.dynamichumanperformance.com. Down south, we have Julius Williams and the Trench Mob. Julius trains offensive and defensive linemen. They compete in 5-versus-5 tournaments, which is all over the country. And they have rounds. They are timed. And Julius's team, the Trench Mob, was undefeated. He coaches the best of the best. He has sent kids to Florida, Florida State, Miami, Alabama, Georgia, Tennessee, Clemson, just to name a few. So if you are a lineman and if you are in Decatur, Georgia, or Gwinnett County, he also has a program for anyone out of state. He will work with you step by step and make sure you're training and doing the right technique to develop yourself. Go to www.battleofthetrenches.com. We have a new sponsor, Luther James Insurance, owned and operated by James Whitfield. For 3 years, he's dedicated himself to the art of financial planning, advanced insurance planning. He specializes in life insurance and retirement strategies. He helps out law enforcement achieve financial stability. His journey in the industry is more than a career, it's a passion. He really focuses on helping to deal with the financial pressures of retirement. Fear of the unknown is real. All you have to do is go to lutherjamesinsurance.com and get a free quote. Very happy to have him on board. And now for the man of the hour, the real estate king of Erie, Pennsylvania, Marsh Real Estate's own Laban Marsh. Laban.
Good to see you, brother. How are you?
Oh, I am tremendous. I am tremendous.
I love that you're building the network there, dude.
We're trying.
And that's outstanding, dude. We need them, man.
We're trying.
It's one of those things where, it's every athletic season comes around, and we as a company and family really like to support, the local athletics because we know how challenging it is to get sponsorships.
Yep.
In fact, I had a meeting the other night I'm on the committee for McDowell's Hall of Fame, and they do their Hall of Fame in the fall, right around homecoming. It's worked out really nice. But it's amazing how difficult it is. We've got a great guy that runs all of it and pursues, a lot of the guys that are already have been inducted that own businesses. Jeff Heil has always sponsored. He's in McDowell's Hall of Fame. He sometimes comes in, from Maryland.
Yeah.
For
right.
it. So, but getting sponsorships is not easy. And,
Nope.
I'll tell you, the way that as businesses, you can write some of it off, but at the same time, it's an expense. Levi and I joke around about it's a write-off. But no, and right now, as the market's going and businesses, are looking at our numbers through the first half of the year, our second quarter was right aligned, with the second quarter of last year. But the first quarter of this year was a little more challenging than last year's first. So,
yeah.
But I tell you what, right now we have seen such an uptick in activity. I mean, it's that time of year, but also I just got a statistic from the board that June of 25, our listing inventory was up like 14%. And sales were down about 2.9. Whereas a year ago in the second quarter, June of last year, it was down 17% in inventory and down 12% in sales. So what we are starting to see, as we, I've talked about before, more inventory is coming to the market, I think because it was so pent up for so long there. And so there are more options for people. But I have a great listing on the market in Mill Creek that we put up. Another one around the corner had gone up at about the same price point. That one's now pending, and we've had a couple people talking about making offers, but we're getting to like day 14. And so part of what that tells me, and I know in any market, if you can sell at a discount, obviously, it's going to be more appealing. But so many people, with the way prices have been going up for so long, we're starting to kind of see that plateau. And again, a lot of things are selling, but I would say they're not selling as quickly. And I think that's more because buyers have accepted that maybe rates aren't going down anytime soon.
Right.
I want to get into a home, but they don't seem to be as urgent. And that's not to scare sellers, because homes are going to sell. But I think when you go in, like I have an appointment tonight for a commercial property.
Wow.
Yeah.
And you don't typically do commercial.
Well, I do. I handle our commercial. There just hasn't been as much commercial activity. And so right now, as I was going through a lot of comparables, there's one on the same street across the street that sold with similar square footage that's pending. So we don't know, it went pending in early April. We don't know what the price it closed for. But it's interesting because when they bought it, 27 years ago, you can't tell if they paid top dollar then or how the market was per se. But it is interesting because the commercial values have not appreciated like the residential values have.
Really?
And I talked to, Marcus, my property manager, and I went to lunch the other day, and we were talking about commercial space. And not only, retail, but, these big box stores, like we're going to have to figure out something to retrofit these spaces, whether it's a doctor's office, whether it's, whatever it may be. If we have brick and mortar that's not being utilized like it once was, because I think so much remote work, like you have psychologists or you have office space. So there is definitely still a demand for brick and mortar. But we've also said when we start to see commercial ramp up, like, hey, people are buying these business places to, hire employees.
That's great for the economy.
And it's going to create, a job for somebody that now can go out and buy a house. So it's all, slow moving. And it's hard to kind of see the ebb and flow of it while you're in it. But it is interesting to see that, it's finally beautiful here in Erie, Pennsylvania. And this is where we call it the busy season. But even right now, if you're writing an offer to buy a residential home, you might not be closing until the end of August or early September when school starts. And then it's like, if you're switching school districts, if you have a contract, you can present that to the district and say, hey, this is where we're moving to, and kind of get the ball rolling there. But this tends to be the time of year where, of course, we have the 4th of July coming up. and then boom, it takes off until Labor Day. So we love being busy. My mother has never been so excited about the market, and we've got some really nice listings. And again, as long as you have reasonable sellers, these homes will sell. But definitely days on market, they're up there a little bit longer. Again, unless you price them really competitively, because
but that's the
competitively priced homes.
conversation you have with these people sometimes. You tell them that from the start.
It was funny because I thought of this yesterday, and I mentioned it to my son, Drew. I had to pick him up from shooting hoops, and he wanted to get out to his buddy's house at the lake. And he's like, well, we can be out there by 3:30. I'm like, no, dude, we will not get there till at least 3:45. He's like, what? That's like I'm like, okay, listen, but it's setting up those expectations. I got him out there at 3:43.
Yeah.
And if he thought it was 3:30, he'd be mad because I'm 13 minutes late. But I got him there 2 minutes early because I set the expectations of realistically what this is going to take. And so I think that's where, even when like I do a market analysis. So when I did the market analysis for the commercial property that I'm going to go see tonight, I can tweak it a little bit. I can show days on market from other things, what has sold, and just try to forecast without an actual crystal ball.
So they know, right?
Yeah, but and listen, like if I tell them, hey, it should sell for 450, but I'm not seeing comps over 400, it's just a disservice. What, to get the listing and then under deliver and over promise? It just never works out.
Yes.
But I think part of it, and my mom always told me this, like, don't be afraid to ask them, like, what do you think it'll sell for? Because if they say,
get their input.
If he says 220 and I think it could sell for 330, man, then I'm going to come in and say, hey, listen, I would tell you that based on what I'm seeing, we actually might be able to get a little bit more. And that's obviously the easier conversation.
Yes.
Versus if he says, hey, we're hoping to get 500,000. And it's like, dude, there's one down the road for 5.25, a little bit more space, really polished. Again, it's just really laying it out, because people don't know. And this is what Fresh said last week, right? People don't know what they don't know. So
yes.
Who are you looking to for advice? And again, it's like, I love handling the commercial real estate and looking at it. It's more of a price per square foot game, but it depends on, again, what was the business? How hard is it? If it's just a box and we can throw up false walls and things like that, okay. But if you have certain appliances or structures within the building that are going to make it difficult to retrofit to another type of business, that's cost, and so
big time.
Just looking at the big picture and everything is what we try to do, and not to be, you got to stay positive. And even when we let sellers kind of pick the price, you got to go in with a positive attitude, because and then I don't know, let's put it on the market and we'll see. But if nobody calls in the first 2 or 3 weeks, we are way over.
That's a message, right?
Right. And I think that's another great point, is that my mom has always said, well, what is the feedback? Because we have apps and things like that you can give feedback on the Home You Show. And they're like, hey, they didn't give any feedback. That is the feedback, dude. They didn't even want to waste time telling. Yeah. I mean, that is the feedback. So, and some feedback doesn't help at all. Like, they tell about what their clients needs and what you don't have. But like, if somebody says, hey, it smells like dog in there, it'd be great if I could get through in more than one breath, which is another thing we sometimes say to sellers. And those are the tough conversations. And I remember during the pandemic, when people were trying to sell things sight unseen, I'm like, dude, it'll never work, because if you go in there and it smells, I mean, it's crazy. I mean, so people, you have to be honest about that stuff. And again, if you pick up on it, I guarantee you buyers are going to pick up on it, and then they're going to scrutinize. And so, yeah, that was a bit of a tangent on what's going on in the real estate market. But yeah, I would say residentially, things are, we're getting more inventory, days on market a little bit longer, unless you price really effectively. There's definitely still multiple offers on occasions too. And then the commercial side, we're seeing some churn. Like one of the comparable properties is pending, like I said, since April. So it'd be, some of these, the due diligence period on commercial stuff can sometimes be. Yeah, I mean, sometimes it's 90 days. It depends on how large the structure is and how much due diligence a buyer has to do. I've seen 180 days, which, again, I mean, 6 full months to decide whether or not they're going to buy it is nerve-wracking for a seller that just wants to get it sold. So yeah, I enjoy having the diversity to do that with property management because, I might talk to them and they say, we never really thought about using it as a lease space. It's like, well, and I've done this before in the market, both for residential and commercial. Hey, we can list it both for sale and for rent. Um,
Oh,
and,
right.
and and there's a time, especially on the residential side, where somebody's like, well, I'd sell it if I can get what I want. But if not, yeah, I would lease it to somebody as long as you guys manage it for us. So that is a unique opportunity that, again, as the market starts to shift and maybe people aren't getting as much as they thought they wanted, but they're locked into a really good interest rate. That is a great way to sustain that interest rate if you have the ability to go out and buy something else, leveraging your existing home. I've told people before, like the best way to become an investor is use the home that you're actually in as an investment. You obviously know all the quirks
Correct.
about it, and then go buy what you want or go build something. Because again, so many people are at a 2.75 interest rate or 3.125. It's like, well, the way you can move and keep that rate is by turning it into a rental property. And we as a management company can help you establish the potential value on the, monthly rent.
And
We can
you
help
said you'd manage it for them too?
Oh, we do that a lot. That was really how our property management division started. We have a local, it's a Lake Erie College of Osteopathic Medicine. And so a lot of students come in, they're usually young adults, college age or later. And this couple moved in and they wanted to rent a house. Or, I'm sorry, they bought a house for my mother. And then they were done with LECOM. So they were moving to Michigan, where he was going to become eventually a surgeon. And the market was terrible for sellers. And so they said, hey, listen, we've got to move. Could you rent this out for us? We own it. We don't need to sell it. But if you can rent it
And
for us. And so I did the reverse engineering. I'm like, okay, what is your debt service? It was like $795. I'm like, all right, if we rent it for $1,000 a month, we charge 10%. So I will
okay,
send you
that's what it would be,
yeah,
10%.
I'll send you a net proceeds of $900. Keep paying your mortgage, pay your insurance. The tenant will pay gas and electric.
Yep.
And I don't recommend putting water, sewer, and refuge in a tenant's name because it becomes a municipal lien if they
No,
don't
that's a
pay.
big deal. Yeah.
Yeah, but we also were talking about the other side of that and why you want to hire a property management company is for eviction. Like I have a home that
Oh,
my
yes.
wife and I own. We bought 11 years ago, and we've been renting it. But it's in
You
an
rent the
area.
house.
Yes, we've been renting the
Okay.
house for 11 years, but I want to sell it. And so a year ago, I had Marcus reach out to the tenant. She'd been there 2 or 3 years, and she said she wanted to buy it. And it's like, okay, go to the bank, get pre-approved, all this.
We'll go through it,
Kept
right.
kept making excuses, kept pushing it off. And so I said to Marcus, I'm like, hey, I
All
need
right.
to have her out on June 30th. So at the end of May, he served her a 30-day notice to move out, and it's part of your lease in our area. I think it's
Oh,
section
so even if
21.
was she paying her rent and everything on time?
Yep,
And you can
yep.
still evict someone if they're doing that, if they're paying rent and
Yeah, our lease states in paragraph
oh,
21 that for any reason, the owner can give 30 days written notice to have the property
oh,
vacated.
okay.
And again, it's
Didn't
not
know
like
that.
we didn't just drop this on her. It was a
No,
year
no.
ago that we said, "Hey, we'd like to get this sold. I would love for you to buy it." And so she knew we wanted to sell it. And it's been a year. We gave her the benefit of the doubt. Marcus had
Yeah.
talked to her a number of times. Again, she kept making excuses.
So she never
And
went to the bank or anything.
she claims she did, but we never received anything. That's the thing. Like, is as a landlord, you can be told these stories, and I've done it for over 2 decades. And it's like we call them sob stories, but listen, it's just like in general, you create. We are where we are because it's exactly where you wanted to be, whether you're willing to admit that or not. So, like, if you're not in a position, I just don't appreciate not being honest with me, where you either don't have the down payment, which we could work with you on. You don't have the financing place. You don't have, I know you have the credit worthy because we have you as a tenant, but it's just frustrating when they're just not being honest. And so again, it might sound cruel, but she knew we wanted to sell the house. She had the chance for a year to buy it. And so we gave her the 30-day notice. And so Marcus says she's supposed to be out June 30th. And so I think it was Lincoln was in the car with me. And I'm like, hey, I got to stop by this property. And sure enough, 2 cars in the driveway. They had no intention of moving out on June 30th. I think Marcus even said, now I think she did pay July rent, But
Right.
that does not change the fact
The
that
situation.
right. And
I
so,
didn't know that.
unfortunately, yesterday he had to post a 5-day notice for eviction. And again,
Now,
we've been to
is
court
that
a
where
time
you
or
have to
two.
get a constable to come and
That
actually
that is
throw them out?
that's the worst case scenario. And we've
Okay.
had a few times where we know it's funny because the tenant never feels comfortable when the constable walks up and starts saying, "Hey, I golfed with you yesterday." One of my brothers or something. We know most of a lot of law enforcement and things like that, but we're cooperative. We've never been ones to
Yeah.
make trouble. We want to provide opportunities, but at the same time, this is a business. And quite honestly, what's funny is the price I offered her a year ago has gone up. Like, I wouldn't even sell
Of
it to her
course.
for what I told her, just because where that's at in
Where the
Mill Creek,
market is.
right
Yeah.
by J.S. Wilson. And I've got some work to do. It needs painted, the exterior and some things. And that, again, is I've said this before, the frustration about long-term tenants is they've never power washed the property. And I paid to have it power washed last year because I thought I was going to get it sold, but it needs a fresh coat of paint. It needs some things before I go to market it, because I just don't think selling it as is the best way to do it when it comes to presenting anything for sale. So it's frustrating, but that is why we created a property management company. And I tell Marcus, lean on me and just say, throw me under the bus. I don't care, because I do this on the sewer authority, where if somebody has a hardship, they'll come in and meet with us. And we had a woman who claimed a hardship, and I found out where she might be working. And so the sewer authority called this place of employment, and the woman answered the phone when she said she didn't have a job. And so again, it's like, hey, you're not being honest with me. So I don't feel bad. It may seem audacious that I'm calling you to the carpet, but you're not being honest. You said you don't have a job and that's why you can't pay. And then you answer the phone at your employees.
That's ridiculous.
Wild.
Yeah.
Yeah. So as a
So,
landlord, I've garnered some thick skin. And the other
well,
thing
like you said, it's a business. You
but
got to
here's
look
the
at it
thing.
that way.
Like, we had a tenant at one point, and I actually ran into her about a decade later in a professional setting. And I don't often do this, but she had totally just stopped paying rent. She
Yeah.
moved out, and the new tenant that moved in told me where she was working. And this is when Mackenzie was like maybe 18 months old, and it was a Verizon store. And I took Mackenzie in, and I just said, "Hey, Monica, I don't appreciate you telling us you were gonna, pay rent, and then you didn't."
And then
And
bolted.
I said, "This is our daughter, Mackenzie, and the reason we own investment property is so it can help pay for her college. So when you're not paying rent to us, it's affecting my
This is
child."
where you're
And
taking money out of their pocket.
and she's like, "Well, can we step outside where you're at my workplace?" It's like, "Oh, does this make you
Oh,
uncomfortable?" If
yeah.
yeah, I went into where she's employed and I talked,
Yeah.
because where else am I going to find her?
Yeah.
And again, people don't like to face the music, but my mom always says, "Put on your big boy pants."
You got
Um,
to.
and, and listen, I had this situation recently with another sale where we had some septic issues, and we had one guy go out. We asked him to pump and then run the scope. Well, he didn't pump it; he just ran the scope, which it doesn't even make sense. And then he stops because it might have an issue. And we ended up having 3 people out there giving different things. And I said, I remember in Connecticut, I had a boss at Alliance Roofing. And if he kept getting different stories, he would tell each person, "Okay, we're going to meet Tuesday at 2:00. Now, they just thought they were meeting with Todd. But everybody ends up showing up, and now we're all sitting in a room, and it's like, well, he said, and he said. It's like, here we go. Yeah, you're gonna be telling the truth, because the person that you're saying is being dishonest is sitting right here. And sometimes, especially with devices, it's easy to text or email. But I still like seeing people face to face. So I'm not afraid to visit a place of employment to discuss matters of business if necessary. Worst case.
No, you
scenario.
have to. You have to. I mean, that's just the way that it works.
Well, and you figure they're lying to protect themselves. So I'm going to be honest and explain to them why I do it, just like why they're trying to skirt rent or whatever else. This is why I collect rent and make sure I collect rent, because it's just the right thing to do. So, and you got any questions for us? I know it's been a minute since we reached out to the
Yes.
audience per se.
Yes. Yes. People were asking, like you were just talking about, when they're selling their home. staging it, and how many open houses do you typically have? Because you just talked about the smell. What
Yeah.
do you help with people? We had a question from someone in Wesleyville about helping with staging the home, how it should look, and how many open houses would you typically do to help sell it? Like, what is there a magic number that you look for? I mean, if you do one of them and it sells, you're good. How many will you typically do if it's not selling?
It's interesting. That is a couple great questions, quite honestly. And we have not really talked open house
Yeah.
literally in years because
Oh,
because inventory is so low. If I list something on a Thursday, by Sunday at 1 o'clock, I
it's
probably
gone
have offers. And that's where you
without
also
having to
know.
do it. Wow.
Right, but that's the same was true. Like I know a local guy who's a photographer, and he does like what the brand of what's called Matterport, where it does a preview of the entire layout of the home and things.
Oh, right.
And we have now. My dad takes professional photos in all of our listings, and that's imperative to show multiple photos.
To put it
But
up online,
addressing,
right.
but what has happened is homes sell so quickly you really haven't needed those services. Same thing with
Oh,
staging. Staging is a fantastic idea. Now, you can get real extensive in the staging where there's an actual staging company that has a warehouse with furniture and
right.
really gets into some things. But there's just like I tell sellers all the time, the two most important rules as a seller are declutter and depersonalize. Because when a
Yeah.
buyer comes into the home, I did this with my grandparents. You went into their family room and there were 50 photos of the grandkids. We love you. But the house we're trying to sell is to somebody that doesn't even know us potentially. And if they do, they might not like one of the kids or something. So
Right.
I tell
didn't think
people
of that.
it's big time. And in fact, I told this story once. My mother-in-law in Albany, they sold their home it's probably been about a decade ago. And she hadn't moved in so long. And I told this story where I tell them declutter, depersonalize. And
Right.
she called me right away after they were looking at this home. She says, Laban, I can't believe this, but I had to call you because of what you've always said about depersonalizing. Ted and I walked through this home. We absolutely loved it. And then as we were leaving, we saw their wedding photo, knew exactly who it was, and I just could never live in their home. I
Really?
couldn't do it. And it's like, see, that's what I'm telling you.
That's great.
But the other story more locally, and neither of them are in news anymore, but there was this home that I walked through. I remember showing a young couple, and I'm like, wow, this thing is staged perfectly. You don't see any photos of anybody. Well, then you go into the master bedroom, which is kind of weird, but there was a photo against the wall. So you couldn't see the picture, but of course, my curiosity, like if it said, don't touch
Right.
this, I'm turning this around to see whose
Yes.
house it is.
Yeah, you got to. Yeah.
And sure enough, it's these two local news anchors. And the reason they didn't want anybody to see personal photos is that everybody knows them from TV. So it was
Right.
another great example of why depersonalize. Now I can look at, records and see who owns the property or whatever else. But for the sake of a buyer, if anything, like if the Jones family is coming to look at your house, go on Facebook, find personal photos of them, hang them in your dining room or living room, and make the Joneses feel at home.
Home, right. That's funny.
In regards to staging, I would say the two most important things still are declutter and depersonalize. The other thing I think about is, buyers do not like to delay gratification. So number one, if you're going to list a home, you better be ready to show it that night at 5 p.m. Like, and again, it seems
so a
crazy.
showing is different than an open house.
Yes, and I will get to the open house because now people do like a Wednesday evening open house, or they'll do an agent open house on a home. But traditionally, open houses were Sunday afternoons, 1 to 3. And then they started to do them Saturdays as well, right?
And the family would have to be out of the home, and you would be in charge of it, right? That's what they
usually
were.
The agent and I we have a lot of newer agents or agents that don't have a lot of listings, so they want that opportunity, to potentially meet buyers. And the truth of the matter of an open house, I think it statistically, like a home sells 1% of the time from an open house. I've done it once in 22 years where the person walked in and they loved it, wanted to make an offer. But most of the time it's nosy neighbors or people just curious about this house. They're not even really interested. And so we tell sellers, the opportunity of an open house is actually for the agents. Because if I'm at the listing and somebody that just saw the open house walks in and I say, hey, are you working with an agent? They're like, no, we just started looking. Boom. Great. Let's sit down, do a buyer. Like, it's a way for me as a listing agent to acquire new buyers.
Client.
Even if they don't like this house, hey, I can show you
I'll
any
show you
house.
something else.
Right.
Wow.
So rarely does an open house actually sell the home. And again, a lot of times it creates the nosy neighbor that's always wanted to see how the Joneses live. And so they're going to come and creep in. And there's even times where I'm like, oh, you want me to invite random strangers that are not pre-qualified in here? Like, that was the other thing. I made the mistake at an open house. This person came in, loved it. Say it was a $300,000 listing. The people loved it. Oh, I'm going to tell my agent we're going to write an offer. So as soon as they left, I called their agent. I said, hey, your buyers just came through. It sounds like they really love it. Can you write it up? She's like, oh, what's it listed for? I said, 300,000. Well, they're only approved for 200. Yeah, they're only approved for 200,000. Okay. So an open house allows any unqualified buyer, never been pre-approved, not really buying into your home. Whereas a showing, right, and there is a law about a year ago. In order to show a home to a buyer, you have to have a buyer relationship agreement. So in Pennsylvania law, I can't even show a home to a buyer unless I met with them, got their autograph to say, hey, I want you to represent me. And now we go in and show the home. If they like it, we write the offer. So, yeah, I mean, and like I said, now that we have longer days on market, I think you are going to start seeing more open houses because it's a way that sellers think they're going to get exposure for their home. But especially if there's buyers few and far between, it is a good indication. Like if you're out in an open house for 2 hours and nobody comes through, I mean,
you've been there. You've seen that happen too.
Oh my goodness. In fact, I just saw on Instagram, somebody walked into an open house and the agent was sleeping on the couch. And that's happened more. Yeah, I mean, they're middle-aged and need a nap. But yeah, I mean, it is something where, to me, and same thing with like those Matterports and like, do you really want the whole neighborhood and world to see the layout of your home, where your bedroom is, and for safety and security reasons?
That too. Yeah, you're right.
So it is interesting, and there's almost always some scripts and dialogues to make it go the way you want it to go as far as the process of the marketing. But I tell people, again, there's 3 aspects. It used to be location, location, location. And commercially, it really is more so than residentially. But now it's location, presentation, and price. And I tell people, like, you better put your best foot forward. The home I have on the market, I met with him in November. So like, he replaced the carpet, he had it painted, he did the due diligence and presented as best he could. We can't move. We're not physically moving this home. It is where it is in the neighborhood with the backyard it has, with the neighbors it has. So the only thing we can adjust is the price. And that's where sometimes, my mom always says, hey, don't just give them a price. What do you think it'll sell for? Because then you bought it. Meaning, hey, if I tell you I think this sells for $425, and now I'm asking you to adjust the price from $450 to $415, it's like, wait, I thought you said this was going to sell for $425. It's like, and that's where I've talked about, like, I give them a price point or a range. Like, hey, this should sell between $375 and $425. And so if we get an offer somewhere in the middle, it's at least worth seriously considering. But and we've had sellers say, well, I don't even want to counter the offer. It's like, what? Well, I'm not going to negotiate against myself. So, and that's kind of how the motivation of a seller. I tell buyers that a lot. Like, okay, if you don't want to make a full price offer, and they always say, well, I don't want to offend anybody. Okay, well, it's not offensive. Just like if they say they, got the house as an inheritance, they paid nothing. Well, they're not going to sell it for nothing. They're going to sell it for fair market value. So I think that's where, make the offer that you feel comfortable with. If the seller just declines it outright or adjusts their price by, say you come under 20,000 and they adjust it by 2,000, they're not really motivated. Most buyers want to meet in the middle from what they offer and what they want to accept. And so if they offer 20,000 under asking, if you counter back right in the middle at 10, and then okay, this seller's being reasonable. And a lot of times they don't want to go back and forth. They want to nip it in the bud. And you can usually do that by being around that midpoint from their initial offer to your initial list price.
But you, as their agent, if you think that you should counter and they can get more, do you do that? Do you tell them that?
Yeah. So here's the situation. And there was also a time in the market where if a buyer made an offer and it was lower and the seller countered, the buyer was going to the next home. Like
Okay.
there were just too many options for them to keep negotiating. But, we had recently an offer that wanted an unrealistic reply. Like they offered on a Friday night and wanted Friday afternoon and wanted to hear by Friday night, end of the day. And it's like, we don't have a
Doesn't
chance to
work
get the
like that.
partners together. Right.
Yeah.
So, but at the same time, as an agent, I'm like, hey, if we reply to this offer after their date, it's technically null and void until they initial our acceptance at a later date. So I think, there's a bureaucracy to the process that you better be
Right.
paying attention to. And the due diligence clause and, time is of the essence. And so we run into that where if you're getting an inspection, right? Say you have 15 days on the contract to do the inspection. Well, it's not just to do the inspection, it's to do the inspection and reply to
Right.
whatever that inspection revealed. So let's say you have the inspection done on day 12 and they don't get you the report until day 14. And now your agent on day 16 sends a reply and says they want 1, 2, and 3 fixed. It's like,
Well,
hey,
yeah.
you needed to get me an extension, for this due diligence period. And my seller might not want to extend the due diligence period. Like again, under promise, over deliver. So I think our due diligence clause says like 10 days. I almost always write in 15 just
Right.
because
Just to be
I'd rather
safe.
be safe than sorry. So, those are the little things that in the last few years, agents could get away with not really paying attention to. But we are going to start seeing that. And we've cautioned our agents, like really look through the agreement and make sure you're crossing T's and dotting I's, because you do not want to be at fault for something that goes awry. And honestly, until you get your check at the closing table, anything can happen. I mean, I've seen
Absolutely.
a walk through the morning of a closing and the closing never takes place because they took all the appliances that were clearly included on the agreement. Or I've seen so many things happen until it closes. You can't count your chickens till they're hatched. So,
Right.
and that's where my mom has also said a lot of times you might have to do the work of the other agent, whether it's chasing around, paperwork or something else, because there are so many facets to a closing, especially if there's financing and all that,
Yes.
that we as agents have to be the glue. And we get frustrated, especially my mother, with an agent that just panics. It's like, hey, you need to be the calm one in this. And just
Yes.
because your client, flew off the rails, they might have had a bad day. They're stressed out about
You got to
all
be
this.
stable. Yeah.
And the timing can be challenging. And again, those are things that you need to warn them in the early. And I know they don't listen all the time, but that's where like we have buyers and sellers guides so that if they're panicking, go back through and read what those say, and it'll help calm you to understand that, this too shall pass, but we have to stay on top of things with that due diligence period. And a lot of times with both sides of the transaction to make sure that everything is getting done in a timely fashion, because, a lot of people don't work on weekends. So
Exactly.
if you submit something on a Friday morning to the bank, they might not get till Monday. And now that's 3 days. We're not talking business days. We're talking days. So
Yeah.
really understanding the agreements and what you're doing, working with experienced agents. And sometimes if they're too experienced, they think they know it, and the market's changing all the time. The contracts change, and you really got to stay on top of those things.
We had a few questions from Harbor Creek and Moorheadville. What is the difference between renting your house and if you want to Airbnb your house? And do you recommend Airbnbs? Do you own or do any Airbnbs? What's the difference?
Yeah, good question. And it's interesting because recently, at least in our area, a lot of municipalities have tightened down their rules on Airbnb, which I'm a
Wow.
big, property rights guy, and I don't like that. Like they've created certain areas for zoning where you can do what they call short-term rentals, because Airbnbs tend to be a weekend or a week.
Right.
In fact, Lucas Lamick and I are all going to Richmond, Virginia next weekend. Because all of our boys are in a Puma circuit down there. And so instead of getting 3 different hotel rooms, Lucas
You
does
got
this a
an
lot.
Airbnb.
We got an Airbnb 3 minutes
Right.
from the place. We all get our own bedrooms and everything. And it's a great idea. So, and this is where, like, from the long-term rent, where if you rent your house long-term, whether it's a, 1-year lease, the one on Bondi that we were talking about, I did a 3-year lease where we did, I think, $1,500 the first year, $1,550 the second year, and then $1,600
Right.
the third year, just to make sure we're covering costs and appreciation and things like that. So there's a million ways to skin a cat. The thing with Airbnbs, make sure you're zoned properly so your municipality doesn't, come down on you, because even though it's a single family home, they're treating it, because there's turnover. It's a
So
frustrating
they can actually control that and say you can't Airbnb your house.
That's right. And it makes me sick. The city of Erie's done it in certain parts. I know Summit Township has certain areas. Mill Creek Township has implemented this. I don't like it.
Is there a reason for it?
They think it's they're calling it like a multifamily use, because many different families are living in that house throughout the year or whatever, versus a family that just rents long-term, 6 months, 12 months. And it's like,
correct.
Okay, well, you can skirt that by just signing every Airbnb to a 12-month lease and then saying, hey, after 3 days, there's no cancellation policy. Like, you're free to get out. Like, you can write documents.
So you can write around it. Yeah.
And nobody wants to do that. But I mean, people always find a way. So that's the one thing I would just caution you to at least call wherever your home is located, call the municipality, just say, hey, if I want to rent my home long-term or Airbnb, is there any problem? And if they say, oh, you're not allowed, then don't give them your address, give them the vicinity. But the Airbnb, and this is where I talk to Fresh, because I've always looked at Airbnb like you have more costs involved, because you got to clean it more frequently as soon as everybody, whoever moves out.
Right.
Yeah, the linens and whatever you might provide there. Plus, it's usually Airbnb is going to be furnished. Whereas my long-term rentals, the tenants bring their own beds, their own couches, all that stuff. So, and you can do long-term rentals with, furniture included and not do the Airbnb. But with an Airbnb, you do have to have it furnished and staged to a certain extent. But I myself, and I've had this debate where, in my experience with long-term rentals and how I get the homes back, which is not as nice as I typically move the tenants in.
Sure.
I want to consider Airbnbs because I have eyeballs on the place more frequently. So if there's a leak somewhere that the tenant just neglects to tell us for 3 months, 6 months, a year, I can catch it after a week, because whoever's cleaning notices, and now we can address it right away. So I think there's a lot of benefits to Airbnb, and we're talking the brand. More. There's also VRBO. I would say definitely it's like anything else, right? If you buy a 24-pack, you're going to spend more than if you buy a 6-pack. So in that regard, if you're just staying for 3 days, it might be, $450 a night, whereas you can rent a place for a whole month for $1,500. You know what I mean?
Right.
Or give or take. So usually, but then it's relative to like a hotel. How much are you spending at a hotel? And in fact, that's where Lucas looked at it like we were going to spend $400 a night in a hotel, or we'd spend $325 in the house, per family. So there are cost advantages and things like that. So the Airbnb, though, my biggest concern for people, at least in our area, are the new municipality zoning laws where they're cracking down on it. And again, if you buy a place for Airbnb and now you can't do Airbnb, is that the intended use of that investment? And goes back to like when we invested in college rentals, and we would get, $400, $500 a head on these kids, and I'd have 4 kids. So that's, anywhere from $1,600 to $2,000. Well, when they changed their policy and wanted, freshmen and sophomores to stay on campus, now I had to find a regular tenant or family, and they maybe were going to pay $795 or $800. So that changes my cash flow position. And that's why I've said you have to pay attention to the municipalities you're in, where you own, and how they operate. Not only that, where are your costs? Like Mill Creek, I think, just announced another 2% increase in their property taxes. Okay, you better be bumping rent by 2%, because, or at least your tax portion. So those are the things that, again, in a property management position, we bring this up to all the owners of the properties and explain, like, hey, because they see the cost of their property taxes and things like that. And it's like, if we need to bump rent, we can. And there are times where, hey, we like rent rent's got to be stable or tenants are going to start moving out and finding better value. So paying attention to the market is key. And I've also found, we're as long-term investors, I would be okay renting for maybe a little bit less than top dollar to have a long-term tenant. Whereas I know some investors, they press the limits and the envelope of what they can get in rent, and they don't care how much turnover they have, right? They'll just get a new tenant to fill it as long as I'm getting top dollar. So there's a bunch of ways to look at, the investment, your portfolio. But those are all, really good questions. And the Airbnb is kind of like,
the house that you're trying to sell and the girl may be evicted.
Yeah.
Would you ever Airbnb that?
So, and I guess that's where
before you rent it again or something.
I mean, it might be worth value. And even to just get our feet wet in that process. When I think of Airbnbs, I think of it's got to be a really good location for whatever it is. Like, whether in Richmond, Virginia, like that we have a local guy that has tree houses, right? It's not a particularly great setting, but it's in a tree house. You know what I mean? The location isn't by a beach or by a, resort or anything like that. And I guess that's where, like, down by Presque Isle, there have been cottage rentals and summer rentals that for years, just because people are drawn there, they'll get fishermen.
It's for traveling.
Right. So, and then now there's a bunch of traveling nurses, so they might not care if they're by the water or whatever else. So they want a more secure location, maybe a neighborhood. And so I think that's where, there's different aspects to it. This one in particular is right by J.S. Wilson Middle School and then an elementary school. So again, that's where it's like, well, it's usually somebody that wants to go to the school district. The school district's going to go 9 months out of the year. You might as well go with a long-term rental. So
right.
I think part of Airbnb is probably more the location than some of the long-term rentals, where obviously location is still important, but maybe it's more important because of the school district the home is in versus its relative location to, some amenity that people are drawn to, right?
So that's not something you guys do.
I do not. I don't have any Airbnb of my, 30 plus doors. We have been scaling down. We've sold a few of our duplexes, keeping some of our duplexes because they cash flow well. But some of the single families, and I've said this before, our city of Erie is vital to the surrounding neighborhoods, but they have so many new taxes. Like I have a vacant lot. I just adjusted the price because I had to tear down an old 1884 Victorian duplex. It was terrible, but during the pandemic, it got trashed, and I just had to because it was a liability. But I think the lot is like $400 in taxes, and they just implemented a stormwater management tax. And on that vacant lot, it's like $39 a year, which doesn't seem like much, but think about $40 a year on a vacant lot. On a duplex, it might be $85. I mean, the city has bumped their budget. That's got to be bringing in close to $2 million in revenue, because it's not just rentals. Everything. Single parcel in the city of Erie now pays a stormwater management fee. I mean, it literally, I wonder if I have it, because I just paid some of our management. So you have county tax, city tax, school tax, and now stormwater management tax. I mean, it's just, and if you own a rental, you have the rental registration tax, which is $40 for a single family, $80 for a duplex. And again, it gets to the point where the city is literally taxing people.
They're killing you. Yeah.
Oh, not to mention 33% of the city properties are tax exempt. So what you have a lot of times is executive directors of these nonprofits that live out here in the suburbs, paying property tax in the suburbs, and then they're getting, boku bucks on a salary in the city. And it doesn't make sense. And then they do have programs like a pilot program, which is payment in lieu of taxes. So like Gannon University, great school. It's awesome for the city.
Yep.
Okay. But they contribute like $100,000 in a pilot program. I pay almost $100,000 in city taxes. So they should be paying probably at least $500,000.
Yeah. They're a university.
So, and that's another, I probably ruffled some feathers with that, but,
but that's true.
Well, when you're taking names away, don't call it Gannon University, call it a university
that's a private that acts university.
As a nonprofit, it's tax exempt. And so I just told somebody this the other night, LECOM, which I had mentioned, Lake Erie College of Osteopathic Medicine, they're acquiring a lot of property in Mill Creek, especially on a main thoroughfare called Peach Street. And they're beautiful new buildings. They look great. but none of them pay taxes.
They make money. They make a ton of money off it.
But they're clearing the tax rolls, and then Mill Creek itself is out there acquiring property as a township, which again, you're not going to be paying tax to yourself. So now you're pulling that off the tax roll, all their acquisition down on the gateway, and their hopes for a outside investor to come in and put together a program that fits what they want. And they don't seem to understand that a developer develops what they want, not necessarily what the township would like to see, because a lot of times what the township would like to see isn't going to generate the revenue needed to cover the cost. And they don't seem to understand. Like, it's weird, dude. I don't know how we went sideways from Airbnb.
No, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, I didn't know the taxes, how that worked, and the nonprofits, and you're absolutely right. That's such a factor. And where you move to, because you can't live.
Well, and the resources, police and fire. Another thing Mill Creek just picked up is paid fire. It's not volunteer now. So that's a chunk for the township to acquire in regards to expenses. And again, anybody who's ever had a house fire will tell you, we need fire and rescue, like vital to our ecosystem and the society. But then do they want to pay for it? Because they're going to be paying for it in property taxes. And so I think that's where it's not about the people or the names of the organizations. It's the functionality and how it does not make financial sense. Even with some of their justifications, and they have like 5 arms that they have to qualify for to function as a nonprofit or to be tax exempt.
Yes,
and a lot of times it's almost like budgets that aren't zero-based budgets. It's like as soon as they got locked into that, even if your plans change, they don't go back and revisit. Like, are you still functioning as a nonprofit and a tax-exempt entity like we approved you for? Because, for instance, Lecom at one point was running a coffee shop out of a tax-exempt property. Meanwhile, Dunkin' Donuts up the road
making a fortune,
paying taxes. Yeah. So, you get me all fired up, bro.
Because we talked about it on our political show. That just people, the biggest thing right now is people can't afford to live with paying rent, with paying taxes, and there's their job salary. The half of it's going to rent and or a mortgage payment. And they were, it was one of the big things we were talking about. We had a senator on from New York, and, he's worried about what's going on in New York City with the mayor situation, because there's a new candidate who they don't think is probably the best, but he won the Democratic primary. And
it doesn't work, dude. Free,
very charismatic, and he said there's going to be free grocery stores, and so with the senator we had, I was like, yeah, he's never had a job, he has no experience, and he's
trust fund
going to be running the biggest city in the world. Like, are you crazy? Like, people can't afford to live.
Well,
how are you going to create a free grocery store?
I wish they'd interview.
You know who we're talking about?
Yeah, and I wish that they would start interviewing small business owners. And like, we understand, like, you're using us to leverage your pie in the sky ideas that will never work.
Go ahead.
Listen, they have been trying to get a grocery store in the city of Erie for decades. But they're not doing it because it doesn't make sense financially. Like, you can only, you can only operate at a loss for so long until you got to shut it down. And that's where small business owners know, because they tighten their belt in tough times, whereas the government keeps bumping taxes, tax and spend, and it doesn't work. Yes. So nobody in the city of Manhattan looking at this is saying, oh, this is definitely going to be beneficial for all of us. There's no buses way.
Yeah, that's what he was saying. He said it's crazy.
But what I don't know how people like that get elected, because they believe in it. It's the same thing that was done, the unconstitutional idea that you'd be able to have your student loans forgiven, dude. You're lying. You can't do that.
Right.
So why are we letting them stand there and say this on TV? That, like,
It's not
So,
possible.
but
It's
I
not
think
possible.
small business owners know, even on a local municipal level, like they've got there's a lot of controversy in Mill Creek right now. I love it. I grew up in that town. I own real estate in that town. But a lot of the things they're doing is not to benefit the community.
Community, right.
It's really crazy. And those of us who know how to do math, like you talk about math ain't mathin', like you can like, I don't know. And I love my wife for this very reason, because when she projects anything, a new business, you talk about under promise and over deliver. Like, okay, if my projections on my pro forma are, kind of thin, it's for a reason, because if we give you pie in the sky and it doesn't work, you're upset. But if it starts to blow those projections out of the water because you did put hard work, you did put due diligence, you did put foresight into some of the hurdles that are going to come up, you're in a much better position. But we have literally municipalities standing in red all over their
All
books,
over. Yeah.
saying this is going to save us. And it's like, no, this is going to sink us
make things
deeper.
worse. Yes. Now, I just brought that up because we had the senator on, and that there's such a controversy about this guy down in New York City. So, the last question I'll ask you, because several people asked, and I think we've talked about this before, but real estate commissions.
Yeah.
Are they negotiable? Do you have a set price that you go with? And are you flexible?
So this is a very pointed question, and everything is negotiable. It's all negotiable.
Okay.
This is what happened with the lawsuit. And what happened, there is no set commission. Everything is, again, negotiable. But what we're talking about now is not just on commissions. What we're asking is, are you going to pay the seller a commission? The selling agent a commission, because the seller typically for decades has paid the commission, whatever it is, call it 4, 3, 5, 6, 7, whatever number you want to choose.
Right.
And then most of the time, the selling agent has agreed to split that with either a sub agent for the seller, or a buyer's agent. Now, I have seen scenarios where it's not a 50-50 split, right? Like I have seen agents say, for sake of argument and not to tie any organization, but if somebody lists a home for 7%, you would think, okay, we might split it 3.5 each. Well, a lot of times, because the seller's agent is putting more effort into it for the seller, they might say, hey, I'm going to keep 4 and pay out 3. And a lot of times the buyer agent does not know what the seller agent is receiving. What they ask is, will you pay me a co-op, right? And again, if the seller understands and agrees that, hey, I'm going to pay no more than X percent, and with X percent, if you want to pay out a buyer's agent, I'm good with that to help it get sold. Because the justification that I tell all clients is when the seller says, well, I don't want to pay a buyer's agent's commission. It's like, okay, do you know how you're going to pay even the seller's agent commission? From the proceeds that the buyer's purchase price is getting you, right?
Yes,
so
exactly.
It's netted out of your proceeds, whether you have a mortgage or not. It's part of the cost, like proration of taxes. And so ultimately, it's a bit of a justification. And going back to, if I find out that they're expecting to sell this for $220, but I know it can sell for $300, I'm not going to adjust my commission up because I know he wants to net substantially less than what I think I can get him.
That's right.
You know what I mean?
It's like,
and so there's no standard, but I have certain standards where I won't work for less than a certain amount.
Yeah.
But it depends. Are you a past client? Have you worked with me? Do you send me 3 or 4 referrals a year? And again, most of my clients that send me a lot of referrals will pay me my going rate because they know what I do and how it helps them. They don't try to negotiate with me per se. And a lot of times I've been in a position where I actually want to pay a buyer's agent a little bit more than what I'm going to keep myself, because I know realistically, I've met with this seller, prepared the home to sell. This buyer's agent could have shown this buyer 10, 11, 20 homes. They've been working with them for 2 or 3 years. Like, they have busted their tail to get us a deal. So I want to compensate them a little bit more. And a lot of times, especially if that little bit more is a 0.5% or a full percent more than what other sellers are offering, that buyer's agent, whether they like it or not, is more motivated to sell the home to where they're going to make a little more commission
They'll
than
work
on
with you.
another one. And so, yes, it is all negotiable, but in a realistic fashion. And so, again, seller, understand when you're asking, X amount to
It's
sell your
3%,
house,
5%,
whatever it
6%.
is.
Yeah.
If the buyer's bringing in that entire amount of money, isn't the buyer kind of paying the commission? So however you want to justify it, yes, it comes out of the net of the seller majority of the time. But with that litigation, recently, there are sellers who say, I will pay you, agent seller, X percent. But the buyer who comes in, I want the buyer's agent needs to get their commission from the actual buyer. And
Right.
that
So
is where if a
is it a
seller
different
saying
rate for a
not
buyer than a seller? Like for you, if you're
it's all negotiable. So again, as a seller or as a
that's
seller's
what I'm
agent,
saying. Yeah.
I can help establish that because the seller pays the fee. When
Right.
I'm a buyer's agent, what
Yes.
happens is if I have an agreement with that buyer, and when we sat down, even before they look at homes, I might say, hey, I charge two and a
This is
half
what I
or
want.
3%.
Right.
But what the
Right.
state is saying is if you've agreed, if your buyer, your buyer has agreed to pay you 3% on whatever the deal is, and now you go to show them a home and that seller is willing to co-op only 2.5, technically speaking, that buyer is responsible for another 0.5% because they said they'd pay you 3 and you're going to
Right.
receive 2.5 from the seller. So then I'm going to get a half for my buyer or from my buyer. Now, and they want to see these align. And it's like, okay, well, if somebody's
That's
going to
tricky.
well, it can be. And if a buyer or a seller's agent is going to pay me 2.5, and I say thank you for the commission, and now at the closing, I want to provide my first-time home buyer the 2.5 commission that I'm going to receive, there's nothing against me doing that. You know what I mean? So to a certain extent, I don't like how the state gets involved with dictating whether the
Yeah.
buyers agree to pay you 3 or 2.5, and when do you want to offer a discount, and when can it be negotiable? I might have sat down with a buyer thinking I'm going to be working with this guy for 3 or 4 months, and then they buy the first home they look at. So maybe I feel like, hey, it saved me a lot of time by them choosing, and I can negotiate it. So hopefully Levi doesn't listen to this episode because he's going to be tearing it apart as far as what I can. This is all hypothetical, full disclosure, all that sort of stuff. But it's all tricky. But at the end of the day, it is all negotiable. Okay?
Right. But I can understand, like, you're not going to take one. It's not worth your time if it's like 1%. It's got to be between 3,
Right.
5, 6% for it to be worth.
Yeah. For me,
what you
20.
put into it.
Yeah.
What?
20.
Yeah, okay. 20.
I'd take 20. 22%.
Okay.
Yeah, but no, it's all very good questions. And there are some agents that will work at a discount. You know what I mean?
Right.
And I always tell my clients, if I can't negotiate food on my table, how do you think I'm going to do negotiating food on yours?
Right.
So I think that's an important aspect. And again, it's something that really hasn't come up in the last 4 or 5 years because everybody's just gangbusters getting as much as they can to sell. And now when it takes a little longer and, what have you done for me lately? You got to be able to show your value. And a lot of times that's in experience and knowledge. It's like that story of the guy, they came in, hit the hammer on the engine, in the right place at the right time, and it started up. And couldn't believe a $10,000 invoice. And he's like, $10,000? You're here for like 2 minutes. He's like, well, you're paying $9,999 for my knowledge and $1 for where I tap the hammer. So I think, and that's where
that
my
makes
mother,
sense.
my mother just is so knowledgeable at the market that she could probably charge whatever she wants, but at the same time, we understand this process. Thankfully, we've got sellers in pretty good equity positions. There was a time in the market where a seller would say, hey, I owe X amount, and you're telling me I can get X amount, which is 10,000 less than what I owe. What do I do? And it's like, you might have to have a short sale where the bank has to agree to a certain price less than that. And a lot of times agents, if they don't ask, they might there's nothing to pay you a commission. So as much as you want them to pay you, the bank has to agree to take less than what's owed and let fees go out, and so again, I know, hey, that market will come around again, as unfortunate as it is. But for the most part, and in Erie County, I saw a statistic where there is a boatload of equity. You know, a lot of baby boomers who have not had a mortgage for a long time.
Right,
And
right,
you know what I mean?
exactly.
So they've got a built up equity. And now that values have really started
They
to
want to
increase,
scale down. Yeah,
yeah, they're in a good position to where, and again, they don't care. They haven't had an interest rate on their home in years. So whether
right.
it's 3.125 or 6.5, they're going to sell, use the cash to buy the next thing. And again, I just hope they start churning a little more quickly because again, we need more inventory, but we are
Yeah,
starting to see it come. Now we need, you know, really well qualified buyers. And like you're saying, like it's eerie throughout the country, costs have gone up.
yeah.
Gas, you know,
That's what everyone's
and I know
saying.
gas is coming down a bit, they're saying, but I'm talking natural gas to fuel your home, electric. Gosh, I cannot believe how much electric, you know, for the house has gone up.
That's
And
what
I
we
don't, you
talked
know,
about.
not regulated per
The
se, but it's
cost
like,
of living is
yeah,
just unmanageable.
it's getting tough. And like everybody says, you know, and when I serve on the sewer authority, right, I'm on the personnel committee, so we see whether you're getting a raise based on merit or the cost of living.
Yeah,
And you know, cost of living had been for about 2 decades between 2000 and 2020 hovering around 2, up or down a little. And then we had the inflationary, you know,
yeah.
8%, and then it's been down at like 4.5 or something. So inflation is coming down, but at the same time, when it bumped as high as it did, as quick as it did, people's salaries and pay just did not keep up.
It's
And
not
that's
covering it.
where, same thing with anything else, it's a long-term effect where now, and you start to see that in what you go out and do and where you spend your money. I mean,
Exactly.
people
So we're
tend to
talking
tighten
about.
up, and I think that's where
They don't
some of
do as
these
much.
small businesses, you know, that have tried to get started have trouble because people
I
don't
struggle.
have that extra income to go and do the things they once were able to do because everything else is too expensive. So it's a harsh reality. And there again is why pay attention to what's going on in your municipalities, know where your taxes are at, where are they spending your
Exactly.
money? Are you going to see increases? Do they have deficits? Because Summit Township is in great financial position. We've got a really strong waste management division out here. We have a casino that really helps the
Yeah.
local economy. We've got you know, really big commercial entities up and down the thoroughfare of Peach Street. So it can be done, you know what I mean? But you've got to have discipline. And a lot of these municipalities and elected officials, not only do they not have discipline, they don't have accountability. Like some of the policies they put in place
It's crazy. Yeah.
6, 8, 10 years ago, none of those supervisors are around to pay the consequences of what they've put into place. And it's frustrating.
No, you're right. And that's why the senator we had on said you have to pay attention to your elected officials, whether you want to or not.
Yeah.
And if you're complaining and you don't like something, you
Oh,
better be out there voting. If you're
yeah.
not voting, then you can't complain.
Well, and you know, there was a time when I was not able to vote because of I had to go to Milliken's funeral at Arlington, and I remember somebody said, "Hey, I don't want to hear you complain if you don't vote." And it's like, hey, you know what?
That's
How about you as elected officials just do what you're supposed to do? Why do I have to vote for you to do what's right for the better good? Like, so
yeah, I know.
yeah, as soon as I missed that one election, and I'm an avid voter, like I'm very involved, but I'm like, you know what? No. How about you have some stewardship, elected
Yeah,
official, and do what you're supposed to do for the betterment
you're
of
serving
society,
the
not just the
community.
people who voted for you, dude. Do
Right,
that, you know,
right.
do that, whatever.
You're right. No, you're right. You're right.
You got me all fired up this episode. I love it, dude.
No, that's good. That's good. It's good knowledge. It's good for people to hear.
Not good for my heart rate.
No, check out the episode we did with the
Yeah, I
senator.
will.
He
Is that
was,
the Rebel Republic?
yeah,
Nice.
yeah. He's a New York State senator. He was phenomenal. But I mean, we talked about a lot of the situations that are going on with the mayor of New York, and a lot of the situations that are going on in DC, and you know, the cost of living, because that was the one thing that my co-hosts and Schumann were talking about, is that just people can't afford to live. I mean, it's not making, the numbers aren't working out. So he was saying, just hold the line. Trump is doing what he can. He's done more in 6 months than Biden's done in 4 years, and he will get this right. He will get the inflation down. and the gas costs down and the cost of living for all of us.
And honestly, the last thing I would say on all that is whether you like Trump or not, this is where, again, I go back to small business owners. Small business owners tend to love what he's doing because he's actually making decisions that small business owners have to make on the daily and is uncomfortable, whether it's letting somebody go, they can't afford their salary. Like, those are tough decisions that you actually have to make in order to survive. And again, you're going to catch grief for it. But it's like, have a bit of a business mentality for these elected officials, because that's like in Mill Creek. I keep going back to it because they are making decisions as real estate investors now. It's like they don't have any qualifications as real estate investors. Even if they're hiring somebody and paying a consultant, like it's, oh man. So I think having somebody in charge that actually has done it themselves and been through it and understand how to climb out of a really tough position and stay, moving forward and having a positive attitude, finding a solution. Right. I mean,
that's exactly
and that's
what
where I go back to even my septic issue with a bunch of these people saying everything. That's like, everybody's telling me the problem, but nobody's giving them a solution. What do we need to do to take care of it? And we tell agents all the time, if you're going to walk into my office with a request or something, you better have 2 solutions for that, whatever it is. Because if you're just bringing me a problem and you haven't thought of the solutions for that problem, it's just not a realistic expectation. Right. All you're doing is creating problems. And a lot of times we're seeing that in politics where they're complaining about everything, but offering 0 solutions. Right. And I don't even have the time for it. Yeah.
No, but you're right. You're right.
Bring these solutions, even if it's off the wall and crazy. Like, because I'm crazy, have something that's, and it doesn't even have to be out of the box. Like, maybe we just need to get back to the basics of real, I'm a big KISS guy. Keep it simple, stupid. And I hear, with real estate investors, I hear it all the time. It's like, they'll tell me how they're doing it. Or they'll say, oh, you don't need credit and you don't need money down. It's like, what? Explain that.
What planet are you on?
Explain that to my 14-year-old son in less than 5 minutes so it makes sense to him. And if you can't,
talk to me like I'm a
little
3-year-old.
skeptical. Exactly. Dumb it down and make it real easy. But most of the time they can't, because they either don't understand it themselves or it's not necessarily the best way to go about it. So,
all right. Well, so you have any plans for the 4th? Are you guys?
So Lucas we picked up some fireworks the other day. He does them in his neighborhood. Yes. It was funny because like a lot of the neighborhood, when the kids were small, now they're growing up and driving, they had to call the police last year because there were all these teenagers around the neighborhood, like with no way to get home. Like they had their parents dropped them off for fireworks, and then they probably said, "Oh, I'll go home with Johnny." And now it's 11 o'clock at night and you have all these teenagers around the neighborhood. So we'll see how it goes this year. But no, we're usually pretty low key. I miss my grandparents used to live on Findlay Lake, New York, and that is where they still have great fireworks out there. But we would always spend the day on the boat. And man, I think about this more. We've got a few lakes, and we've talked about Screwn. I know you're at Old Forge. I love lake life. I mean, there is nothing like, a little ski boat or a pontoon boat, just getting out in the sun and, cold water. I miss those days. And that's where Meg and I have talked about whether it's Findlay Lake or maybe Chautauqua, something within a, 45-minute drive would be a great, second home to get away. Yeah. But we've been grinding so much. Like Drew actually has a basketball tournament on Saturday. So, we'll do what we do on Friday, kind of lay low and do fireworks at Lucas's Oak Valley. See if we're Oak Hill, I should say, not Oak Valley. Oak Hill subdivision in Mill Creek behind Walnut Creek Middle School. He'll have a ton of fireworks up there. It'll be a good time. But how about you? Any big plans?
Yeah, I'm going up to the camp, going up to the lake.
Nice. The whole family going?
Yep.
Nice.
Yep.
That's
Love
great,
it.
Dude. We'll have a great time, man. Enjoy yourself. Be safe.
Absolutely.
Need all your appendages. Keep all 10 of them, bro.
Yeah. I'll do what I can.
Yeah.
I just have to say thank you again to Fresh Ned Von Young and the Fresh Road Laundry Company in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. They now have a pickup service. You can schedule online. They pick up your clothes, wash, dry, and fold them at lightning speed records. They also have online, they have a subscription service weekly and bi-weekly, and they have deals for college students in the area. Just go to their website, freshfold-laundry.com. And again, thank you to Luther James Insurance and James Whitfield for coming aboard as a new sponsor. He's in Bergen County, New Jersey. All of your financial needs, life insurance, retirement planning, LutherJamesInsurance.com. So for Laban Marsh, the king of real estate in Erie, Pennsylvania, and beyond, I'm Steve Cully, the best podcast host in the universe. Remember, when life gives you lemons, don't make lemonade. Take 2 oranges, throw them right back at life.